Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on the vital component window in Design Manager. My name is Brad. I'll be hosting the demonstration. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to enter them into the questions pane under GoToWebinar panel. If the question is outside of the scope of today's discussion, please email them to support@designmanager.com. Lastly, if you missed a portion of the webinar or want to review any of our past discussions, go to our YouTube channel at Design Manager Inc., Design Manager INC. And here you can review a whole variety of topics, starting with our quick start, our shorter tutorials, and then our longer webinars such as today, including project management courses, accounting, and any of our recent weekly webinars. To that point, today's discussion is intended as a more in-depth review of the component window, and assume that you have some working knowledge of that screen. If you want a more introductory overview of the component and items windows, you can watch one of our tutorials, such as entering an item, which covers both of the windows. Further, as this is essentially the second of a two-part series that we began a few weeks ago, as we just discussed the intricacies of the other side of a specification, the item window itself, just a few weeks back, and that can be viewed also on our YouTube channel, and you can see our item window webinar. Lastly, as a component is so fundamental to Design Manager that it relies on many diverse concepts, all of which deserve their own consideration, and we have done so in many of our past discussions, I'll review and refer to those webinars where appropriate so you can really deepen your Design Manager understanding. We'll begin our discussion by entering a new specification for one of our projects so that I can review each available field and data entry point on the component window. Now, it's important to remember, I'm going to discuss all the possible information you can record in the component window. You do not need to enter everything that I'm going to review. You only need to enter the information that's important to you, your team and company, your vendors, etc. And this webinar just allows you to determine what you and your company feel really is important. So let's go to our project tab in our specification window. And we'll go ahead and put in our Carter project, our Pennington home, which we'll be focusing on in this discussion. To get to our component window, we're going to add an item by clicking the Add button, and that gets us to our item window. Now remember, our discussion today is focused on the component window rather than the item window. So I'm only going to input the necessary information here, in particular regards to how it may apply to the component window. So let's say we're going to have a custom sofa. Location, let's put that in the living room. A quantity of 1. We'll use each as our unit of measure. Our sales category will be furniture. And there we go. Just like that, we have our item information, all that we really require, already entered. Now we're going to turn our attention to the component window at last. Key point. If the item window is intended to record information from the client's perspective, the information we'll be entering on the component window is really intended to be conveyed to the vendor, or at least internally at your company. Information entered on the component window will be displayed on the purchase and work orders, along with any reports and windows intended for order tracking information. To add a component, we simply click the Add button, as indicated by the green plus sign to the right of the component window of component grid. And there we go. And here's our component window. Right from here, we can see a few pieces of information for us for our reference. First, in the window title, we can see the component window name. Then we see the project code and the associated item number. On the component tab, we show the current component number as well. So this is our first component for item 0017 or item 17. And notice a single item can have up to 999 individual components. Before we really get going, remember, you can always use the help system to get any information about a window in Design Manager just by clicking on the question mark in the lower left corner. That gets you right to the appropriate page in our help system. In fact, Each and every tab on a window has its own help page as well. So you can review any of the information that we've discussed in the past just by clicking that help button. Okay. Let's get back on our component tab, and we'll begin with our description. Notice it says PO or purchase order description here. This information does default from the client description on our item window, but it can and often is intended to be changed. The description will be only seen by the vendor on the purchase order and work order, so you can include any sensitive information such as a cost request or the manufacturer showroom. You can put your catalog number in there, etc. And you can be confident that the information will never be seen by the client unless you specifically convey that to them. So let's change the custom sofa default description to a portion of the sofa. How about the sofa frame? If I want to check my spelling, I can just use the spell check as indicated by the check mark and the ABC letters in the bottom left corner, or I could hit Alt-C on my keyboard and do the same, and Design Manager agrees that I have no spelling problems there. I also have the ability to format my description along the right-hand side, all of your common formatting options, bold, italicized, underline, etc. You can even change the color to make it as dramatic as you'd like. Lastly, there's even the ability to print the description out. If the description is quite lengthy for a particular component and you're finding it a little challenging to review it on the component window itself, just print out a copy so you can review. Next, the type or component type. This allows us to classify the good or service so that the proper pricing calculation, a taxable designation, and many other settings are automatically configured based upon that component type. In conjunction with the sales category that we entered on our item window, the component type also determines the proper revenue and cost of goods sold accounts that's going to be affected when we invoice the client and receive our vendor invoices from our vendors respectively. So many options can be configured on a component type basis that we've actually dedicated a webinar just to the concept of component types and some associated topics. And that's under our sales categories and component types explained, where we go into a lengthy discussion on the intricacies of those topics and how they can help you standardize and automate your Design Manager. Get from inventory. If the component that you're adding is actually coming from your company's inventory, you can select the desired merchandise by using the Get from Inventory button. Doing so will default the vast majority of the information we're going to be discussing shortly. So if we click our inventory button, that gets us to our inventory search window. Let's take a look at the sconce as an example. And notice we have our description that would default, our sales category, cost and pricing, vendor, manufacturer's catalog number, etc. So if we were actually pulling the sconce in as our component, all of that information would automatically update for us and indicate that we're pulling the item out of inventory. We, however, are not. We're creating our sofa frame. Next, the vendor. Now, the vendor is obviously the entity from which you'll be purchasing the good or service. If you know the code or name of the vendor, you can just begin typing and select from the narrowing list of choices. So if I wanted to grab our interiors, you can. If you have the code committed to memory, which many of my clients do, you can just type the code in its entirety and tab out. Just like that. I know I've committed the Century Furniture code to memory. I can just type it and move forward. Lastly, I can use my downward arrow or the search button in the bottom left corner to get to our traditional search window, or I could select the desired vendor from here as well by just grabbing it on the vendor grid and hitting the choose button. So any way that you want to use your search options, you have a lot of flexibility in there as well. Now, upon selecting Century Furniture as the vendor or the provider of our sofa frame, the vendor deposit percentage defaulted for us. That actually comes from our Century Furniture vendor. Let's take a look. If we go to our vendors window, jump down to Century, edit. On the defaults tab of the vendor payee window, we can see our deposit percentage entered there for us. And in fact, what component types does that deposit apply towards? In our case, Century only wants deposit on merchandise and not freight, installation, etc. So that's how it's configured. This is another example of how particular settings in Design Managers can be configured on a component type basis. Okay, next, the ship to location. This is the address to which the merchandise will be delivered. The ship to address defaults from the project window information tab. So let's jump over to our Carter Pennington Home project, edit that. And we can see if we look in the bottom third of the window that our ship to code is configured to be using the ship to address. So in this case, we're going to be drop shipping most of our merchandise directly to the Carter's residence. Now, that's the way our company handles shipping, but some firms may have all the goods shipped right to the company office first, or even a third-party company may receive all of the merchandise and then do the deliveries themselves. In that case, you may actually want to set a company-wide default ship-to location. To do that, go to File, Company Information Settings, select the Advanced button, and then jump over to the General tab, and I actually could input my firm as an example to have all of my projects configured to have deliveries sent directly to the office, and I could always reconfigure those as necessary for individual components. Since my firm does not do that, though, I'll leave it blank so I can configure each project to have its own ship-to address. But just for an experimentation, let's say that our sofa frame is going to another company that's going to fabricate the sofa for us. One of our, how about Curtain Call's workroom? We'll have our sofa frame shipped right there. Pricing model and percentage. Next, we see our pricing model selection and the associated percentage for the component. These two default down from the project configuration for each component type. Let's take a look again real quick at our project defaults, and our advanced button gets us to our project advanced options for our Carter Pennington Home, and you can see for each component type I've pre-configured my pricing model and the percentages for each. While we're here, notice that the taxable setting can also be configured for each component type and will default to all of our specifications. And there you can see we're using the markup model at 30% for merchandise, and my taxable designation is also defaulting from the project settings as well. Let's take a look at our options for our pricing models. Now, as I said, we're marking up the cost at 30%, but we also have the ability to discount off of list. So in this case, I may present the retail price for the merchandise to our clients and say I can get them a 20% discount as an example, knowing that I can get actually 30 or 40% off that retail price. Another pricing model we have available is the fee pricing. Fee pricing is generally used more by commercial designers or design firms that are acting as purchasing agents or agent for processing, whereby they go out and procure the goods and services for their client, the cost upon which they receive a fee. We'll, however, go back to our markup at 30% model. And clearly, employing and implementing the desired pricing model in Design Manager is extremely important. Enough so that we, of course, have already recorded a discussion devoted solely to the topic. And that is in our Markups, Discount, and Fees webinar, which again, you can review on our YouTube channel at your leisure. Before moving on from pricing models, however, I do want to point out the use of buying terms in Design Manager. Buying terms are conditional percentages of the unit of the list price given to you by your vendor, as your company has a special relationship with the vendor, such as you're a reseller or something along those lines. And those buying terms actually determine the cost from the vendor off of the list price. Let's take a look. I'm going to select our buying terms option, and when we do, we can see that there's a series of 3 percentages that I can optionally enter. And these are, again, provided to you from the vendor, and depending on how strong a relationship you have with the vendor, those terms will continue to reduce your cost, maximizing your profit, of course. Also, upon selecting the buying terms option, notice now my unit cost and extended cost fields are grayed out or disabled. Well, that's going to be calculated again for us, predicated on the combination of the terms themselves and the list price. Let's put in a term selection, perhaps 30, 10, 0. And if our list price for our sofa frame was $1,800, notice that Design Manager calculates the cost based upon the combination of the list and terms for us. And at this point, I can even, again, mark it up 30% if desired. So if I say the sofa frame retails at $1,800, but I'm giving it to the client at $1,474 and change, they think they're getting a great deal while I'm actually making a pretty good markup. If you do have terms with a vendor, you can input them also on the vendor window, defaults tab, and you can simply enter your terms in to the 3 buying terms fields. If a vendor does have terms entered and is selected on the component window, upon doing so, the terms, of course, will come over and the buying terms option will be selected for you. Okay, buying terms. Let's turn those off in our case, and we'll reset our cost to 0. Next, the MFG CAT number, manufacturer's catalog number. You may call this an item number or SKU number. This is going to automatically appear on the purchase and work order, nicely highlighted in bold for you. Some people do actually put the manufacturer's catalog number into the purchase order description, which is fine, but if you enter it into the manufacturer's catalog number field, you can have the ability to locate a specification or specifications based upon that catalog number, using tools like your specification search and other abilities. So let's just go ahead and pop something in there as an example. Now at this point, all we need to do is input the cost and pricing information for our sofa frame. Remember, in Design Manager, cost is what the vendor is charging you, while price is what we're ultimately going to be charging our client. So let's imagine that the cost of our sofa frame is $1,800. And here we go. Notice that the quantity and unit of measure default down from the item window on our first component. So in our case, the extended cost would match the unit cost, of course. Then we calculate our markup amount based upon the 30% of that $1,800, and we determine a selling price to the client for the frame of $2,340. Now, all of these values in the markup pricing model are interrelated, and changing one will affect the other. So, of course, if we change the cost, let's say it's actually $2,000, our markup amount will increase, as does the sell price proportionately. If we change the markup amount, the markup percentage changes, as does the sell price, but the cost, of course, remains fixed. And we could even change the sell price, which will then change the markup amount and percentage as well. So you have really full control over all of those figures, and changing one will affect the other ones appropriately. Let's get back to our 1,800 at 30%. And there we go. As we just saw in markup pricing, the sell price is directly dependent on the cost. But let's say a scenario arises where we want to honor the sell price that we've created for the client, but still make changes to the cost. Let's say the vendor gives us a discount, or unfortunate, unexpected cost increases occur, or something along those lines. Well, in those cases, we can use the lock pricing option, as indicated by the small blue lock to the right of the sell price, that allows us to change the cost without a corresponding increase or decrease in the selling price to the client. So let's go ahead and do so. And what we could see happens is Design Manager actually throws the pricing model into discount mode at 0. But now, if I make a change to the cost, say it increased unfortunately by 100, I have no corresponding increase to the sell price to the client. So now I'm honoring or quote unquote locking the price to the client and untethering it from any changes to the cost. Let's go back to our model, and there we go. Lock pricing, very handy in those situations. We can also easily add any other fees or costs associated with the main component in the additional charges frame along the bottom. Such charges are then linked to the main component so that when the sofa frame is going to be included on a purchase order, the additional charges are automatically be selected. In some cases, when the pricing of the main component changes, the associated charge will automatically update as well. Let's take a look. If we drop our first component type menu down, you can see our options: merchandise, freight, creating, installation, and design fee. Besides merchandise, all those other types are actually completely user definable, which you can change in your company information, advanced, general tab, and you can see besides the specialized types for merchandise and time, you can configure the other 4 compliant types to be anything you want. If you don't want to have creating as an example, you could remove creating and split installation and labor. So another way that you can hone or customize Design Manager to match your business flow based upon those component types. So let's add some freight. And if we select freight, notice freight has its own markup at 10%, which I configured on our project window defaults tab, project advanced options tab, as we saw before. Let's put 100 in for that cost. We could also add a design fee or a purchasing fee on top of our markup. In this case, we have design fee using the fee pricing model. So any component type that uses that model then automatically throws the price into the cost and takes the percentage based upon that sell price and charges that to the client. So any changes in my sell price would automatically update my design fee as well. Okay, that's lots of information already, and we just got started. Let's move on to the next tab, the Special Instructions tab. Here we can input any information that we want to include on the purchase and work order for the component. First, we have our special instructions. These are used to convey any information about the order itself to the vendor. If multiple components are included on a single purchase order and they have individual special instructions, Design Manager will automatically concatenate all of them together for a nice, concise presentation to the vendor. If I have a bunch of standardized remarks that I'd use time and time again for my purchase orders or other areas, I could select my search button in the bottom left, which gets me to my remarks glossary, and I could just pull a remark that I've saved in the past. And of course, I could add additional information on there. How about, please verify dimensions prior to processing order, or something along those lines. And I can go ahead and italicize and highlight that in red if desired. Beneath that, we have our purchase order side mark. This is going to print immediately below the component on the purchase and work order so the vendor can properly tag the merchandise, not only for your company, but in our case, we also have the project itself and, in fact, the room within the residence as well. All of this information defaults automatically from the project. Let's jump back on our Carter's Pennington Home project, our familiar defaults tab now, and we can see upon creating my Carter's Pennington Home project, I like to put in a standardized purchase order side mark. So in our case, we use VND, or an acronym for our VitaNova designs, and then as procedural, we always put in the name of the project itself. The append location to side mark option to the immediate left of that will automatically put the location name of the item for which the component is being created. So we can see I've got my default side mark from the project, and then from the item itself, the living room name is automatically being applied to me as well. And I could even add more information if desired. If you need a sample of a fabric or material, you can use the CFA required option, and the phrase cutting for approval required will be displayed on the purchase order immediately beneath the component. So that really conveys it to the vendor that you want to have a sample sent. The ship on or before, you can input the date by which you want or require the vendor to ship the product. I could use my date search and select an appropriate date. A handy trick with dates, if you don't need to type in the month / day / year, you can simply type the month, then the desired day, and just by tabbing out, Design Manager will assume it's the current year and do the formatting for you to make your entry as fast as possible. Workroom special instructions, they're very similar to the purchase order special instructions, but these will be displayed on the work order document beneath the component rather than the purchase order itself. Design Manager allows you to have separate instructions so you communicate to both the vendor and the workroom independently. Beneath that is a special setting just for work orders, and the part of work order heading option indicates the component essentially represents the overall fabricated merchandise rather than a constituent piece of the assembly of a work order. Since each item must have at least one component, it would be redundant to display the workroom instructions from the item information in the header of the work order and then repeat it in the body of the document. So this option basically prevents the component from being displayed on the on the work order, and thereby reduces any confusion with the workroom themselves. Let's jump down a few tabs to our Picture tab. Now we can input an image of our component on the Picture tab and have it optionally shown on the purchase and work orders. We have an option, Copy from Item. If you just added a picture on the item window, you can see the item has its own Picture tab as well. And you want the same image on the component, just set the Copy from Item option, and Design Manager will bring the image down from the item as well. In fact, if you always want that to occur, on your Company window, Company Advanced Options, Purchase Order tab, you can select the default item picture to first component. So Design Manager will always copy that image down for you if that's something that your company does as a standardized procedure. If you want to input another image, you have a bunch of different ways. If you have a scanner attached, you can put a copy of the picture on the scanner and click the Scan button. Design Manager will import it in. You could use the Load button to select the image off of your computer or even your network. But more commonly, you're just going to use the Copy Image from Clipboard function. So if we go out to our custom sofa, let me copy this. And then by clicking the clipboard along the right-hand side, Design Manager will paste the image right from our copied picture on our computer. Now, let's go ahead and save our component while pointing out another lesser known feature. Now, if we just click OK, Design Manager is going to save our component and return us to our item window. If we click Cancel, we're going to lose all of our information that we just took all of our time to add. The OK add, however, is going to save our component, just like the OK button does, but it's going to refresh our component window so we could easily input another. So if we click OK add, we can see now that we're going to be on component 004, and we'll explain that momentarily, as we'll see in a second. So let's go ahead and quickly add another component. Let's say we have some sofa fabric that we want to add in. And now that we're getting a little bit more comfortable with our component window, we can add this a little bit faster. So let's say we're getting some fabric from Kravet. Okay, we'll leave that set for merchandise. We know that our vendor is Kravet. Go ahead and select them. Notice here, our ship to is now our Curtain Calls workroom. But as we reviewed a few moments before, our project default was the Carter's home itself. Well, when using the OK add, Design Manager is going to remember the last shipping location, assuming that this is going to be the same one. Just trying to anticipate that most of your merchandise that you're using and entering in immediately will be going to the same shipping location. You could have changed it, of course, if necessary. We'll leave ourselves marking up at 30%. We could put our catalog number in. Jealous 5.0. Our unit cost, let's say that's $55. Perhaps we need 18 yards. And there we go. Now our extended cost is going to be $990. We're marking it up 30%, and we're calculating a sale price on the fabric to the client of $12.87. If we jump over to our special instructions, we could go ahead and select our CFA required, and we could even input our ship on or before date here as well. And lastly, if we wanted to include an image of our fabric, let's go ahead and copy our picture from Kravit's site and go ahead and place it right in there, and we're ready to go. So as you see, we become more familiar with our component window. We can really add our information as quickly as possible. If we click OK here rather than OK add, we're going to return to our item window, and we can see we have 4 components. Well, notice our additional charge components are indeed, they're truly components, and they're associated with the main component, as the description says, the component type for the parent or linked or main component. So we have our freight and our design fee for our main component 001. That's why our fabric is now on the 4th component. Okay, so how does all this information we had to get utilized in a practical nature? Well, as Design Manager is fully integrated, now that we have our components created with the requisite data, we can create our purchase orders, farther down the design cycle. So if we click OK to save our custom sofa, there it is, item 17 in the specifying status on our project specifications window. Let's illustrate the point by going ahead and making a purchase order for those goods. So let's jump off our specifications window. We'll stay in our project tab, but we'll go under our documents frame to project purchase and work orders. Put in our cart or project. There's all of our existing orders, and we'll go ahead and add a new one by clicking add PO in the bottom left. And right up top, we can see all of our components for item 17, including our sofa frame and the associated freight and design fee, and there's our fabric from Kravit. If I select our sofa frame, notice Design Manager automatically selects those associated components for us, just making our data entry as fast as possible. But we don't need to include them on the purchase order if we don't desire. So our design fee certainly wouldn't need to be included, so I could just uncheck it. Go ahead and select our Kravit fabric, and we'll click OK to generate the purchase orders themselves. And right away, we can see some of the information that we've been entering. We have our ship on, or ship by dates being displayed for us, along with our special instructions that we added into our sofa frame itself. And if we click OK to view our purchase orders, let's take a look at where all of our information is coming from. So here's our vendor. So our Century Furniture vendor information is being displayed for us, along with our ship to location information. There's our ship by or ship on or before date. The ship via account and terms, well, they all come from our Century Furniture vendor, again, on the vendor window itself. There's our quantity and unit of measure, our description, the reference number is shown for our viewpoint, catalog number, there's our side mark, unit and extended costs, and we have our special instructions. We required a 50% deposit, if you recall, from Century, so that's being displayed. Century is requiring a 50% deposit from us, I should say, so that's being displayed in our deposit enclosed, highlighted nicely in bold along the bottom. There's our freight being displayed, and we can even see our Kravit information as well. So we have our Kravit vendor, the shipping location here, description. There's our cutting for approval being shown for us, catalog number as well, and the unit and extended cost. And since they are not requiring a deposit, we don't see the deposit enclosed information along the bottom. Now, obviously, that's just very quickly going through the process of generating a purchase order. So on our project management course 2, purchase and work orders, you can see that I spend over an hour discussing those features at great length. So you can review that for a much greater understanding at your leisure as well. And we'll go ahead and accept our orders, and there they are right on our purchase order window. Let's get back to our component window. Our specifications, put in our project, and there is our custom sofa. Let's review a few of the final tabs that we skipped over. So we're going to edit our sofa frame again. Notice along the bottom we see a green arrow being highlighted. These are our previous and next arrows. So if I click the next arrow, it's going to scroll through all of the components. You can see I'm going to components 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the previous just returns it to the component beforehand. So you don't need to go in and out of the components. You can use those previous and next arrows to review all of them just by cycling through. Let's get back to our sofa frame. Let's imagine you want to create a reminder or an appointment specifically about our sofa frame. Well, you can do so on the component window schedule tab. Or we can actually add a task or appointment for ourselves by clicking the add button as indicated by the green plus sign. And let's say that we have a task of, how about we follow up with delivery, due date. Let's go ahead and say that's on the 2nd. Start date doesn't matter to us. I can even set a reminder. And when I select the reminder, it defaults to the due date. We'll go ahead and put that right 9 a.m. I could even have a recurrence. If this is a task that I want to occur repeatedly, I could select the duration and how long it should recur if I want to terminate at some point. Contact type. Well, I want to talk to the vendor, so I could select the vendor contact type, put in Century, and just like that, all of the relevant Century information, contact information appears for me for my review and my benefit, so I can easily contact them. Beneath that, I have the option, who is this task for? Is it for me? And then any other of the team members who have Design Manager Cloud user accounts would appear there. I could even direct it to everyone if desired. I could have a copy sent to myself, or I can even indicate it being private. Beneath that, you can see that I'm already linking it to our Carter's Pennington Home project and the appropriate item and component number as well. I could optionally include it on our project schedule and even select the appropriate phase. Let's say that's going to be under installation. If we click OK, we can see I've crafted a task for myself specifically linked or attached to this particular component. If I click OK and OK again to save the item, we can even see the task or reminder right on my specification window. And just by hovering my mouse over that task, I can see the entire information recorded within. I can even jump over to our schedule tab on the specifications window, and we can see here's my general phases. I'm falling right into phase 5 for installation, and all of my tasks will be listed there as well. Now, if the schedule tab and creating tasks and appointment is new to you, or you require a bit more information upon that, be sure to review our webinar on that topic under status codes and the project schedule. Okay, now let's take a look at the final tab on the component window. And to do so, let's review a specification that's a little farther along on the design process. So let's go ahead and edit this armchair. We'll edit the merchandise itself. And now we're focusing on the third tab for order status. The Order Status tab is used to review and possibly change status information of the component, along with displaying important information regarding the progression of the component through the design cycle. So CFA date. Now, if we did require a material sample and we've received and approved it, the date of the approval could be input here for our records. Status storage location. This could be an area to record any simple status update or where the product is currently located within your facility or even at another receiving area. Installation date or install date and user date too. Design Manager has two more fully customizable dates for your internal tracking. If you have particular milestones that we don't have as natural dates, you can configure Design Manager to use them. And to do so, that's back on our company information window, advanced, general, and you can see we have two customizable user dates. Now we have install date listed as an example, but you can go ahead and input any date that's relevant or considered important in your design process for both of those dates. Again, they would appear right on your component window Order Status tab. We have our purchase and work order grid. This is going to show any and all purchase and work orders upon which the component was added. We can see the purchase order number, the quantity ordered, the order date, vendor, deposit that was paid already, the deposit check number and date, and some additional order tracking information as well. Also, we have our vendor invoices grid along the bottom. This is going to show any and all vendor invoices recorded for the component on the purchase orders. We can see the unique transaction number of the payable, the vendor, of course, the invoice number from the vendor, the date, obviously the purchase order associated with it, quantity, cost, and even the check number and check date associated with it. So you have a lot of order tracking information and financial information at your fingertips on your component window. You don't need to run around and ask the payables team if they have entered in the bill or the check's been recorded. All that information is available to you as Design Manager is fully integrated. We even have the ability to conveniently access the purchase order status window from the Order Status tab. Just by clicking the Edit button, that jumps us right to the purchase order status of the associated purchase order. And I could go in and review other components on that purchase order, or I could update or gain some greater understanding of the order itself, rather than going out of my component window, going over to my project purchase orders, typing in the code, and using the status from here, our receiving status. You can easily access or jump to it right from the Edit button or Edit Status button on the Order Status tab of the component window. And that brings us to our conclusion of the in-depth discussion on our component window, where we focused only on the component window in our project specifications, as I tried to review in detail all of the information that's available and how it's displayed throughout Design Manager in other areas, such as on our on the purchase order and work order. We reviewed the Order Status tab for information regarding the progression of the component through the order process. We looked at the Schedule tab to create a task associated with the component. We discussed how to input pictures and more. And I thank you all for joining the discussion today, and I hope you attend another of our free webinars in the near future. Thank you, and have a great day.